It's 2 in the morning. You're awake again. Not because you want to be, because sleep won't come. Your body's there in bed next to someone you promised to spend your whole life with. But your mind is somewhere else entirely. Somewhere dark, somewhere lonely. You're staring at the ceiling. The shadows move across the plaster as a car passes by outside. Streetlight. Darkness. Streetlight again. Your wife is asleep, or maybe she's not. Maybe she's also awake, facing the wall, wondering the same things you're wondering. When did this happen? When did we become strangers who share a mortgage? Your chest feels tight, not painful. Tight, like someone's wrapped a belt around your ribs and pulled it one notch too far. You know the feeling. You've felt it 100 times in the last few months. Maybe longer. Maybe so long that you can't even remember when normal felt normal anymore. The sheets are cold against your skin. You move your leg. It makes a sound. You freeze. You don't want to wake her. Or maybe you do. Maybe you want her to wake up and ask you what's wrong. Maybe you want her to fight for this. Fight for you. But she doesn't wake. She just breathes. Steady. Peaceful. While you're dying next to her. Your phone sits on the nightstand. Dark. You could pick it up. You could scroll through pictures of other people's marriages. Perfect pictures. Laughing couples. Anniversary posts. Sunset dinners. You've seen them 1,000 times, and they cut you every single time because you absolutely know, that those pictures are lies. That somewhere behind that smile is the same exhaustion you're feeling right now. But the pictures don't help anyway. They just make it worse. You think about your wedding day. You can still see her in that dress. You can still remember how your hands shook when you said those vows. How real it all felt. How impossible it seemed that anything could ever destroy what you built that day. And yet, here you are. 15 years later. 20 years. 30 years. And you're wondering if you made the biggest mistake of your life. This is the secret nobody tells you about marriage. Not the pastors. Not your parents. Not your friends. They tell you about the romance. They tell you about the adventure. They tell you about building a life together. But they don't tell you about the silence. The heavy, suffocating, all-consuming silence that happens when two people stop knowing how to talk to each other. They don't tell you about the resentment. How it grows like a fungus in a dark basement. How you can't see it at first, but you can smell it. You can feel it in the air. And then, one day, you realize it's everywhere. It's in the kitchen when you make coffee. It's in the car on the drive to work. It's in the bed at 2 in the morning when you're staring at the ceiling wondering when your spouse became a stranger. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? You don't know whose fault it is. You blame them. They blame you. The fight starts over something small. A dish left in the sink. A text that wasn't returned. And then suddenly you're screaming about something from 3 years ago. Something they said. Something you did. And you're both standing there, exhausted, realizing that you're not actually fighting about the dish. You're fighting about the fact that somewhere along the way, you both stopped trying. You both stopped believing that this could work. You both started keeping score. Your heart is pounding now. Even thinking about it makes your heart race, because you know that tomorrow she'll make breakfast and you'll sit across from her and you won't say anything. And she won't say anything. And you'll both pretend everything's fine because saying it's not fine means having to do something about it. And doing something about it means possibly admitting that you don't know how to fix this anymore. That's where you are right now. That's the place you're sitting in. And I want you to know that you're not alone in that place. Not even close. If you're in that bed right now, if you're feeling that tightness in your chest, if you're wondering whether your marriage can survive what you're both going through, I want you to stick around. because in the next 25 minutes I'm going to tell you something that changed everything for me and my wife. And if you've been searching for answers in all the wrong places, if you're ready to understand what real marriage actually looks like, then hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more coming, and you're not going to want to miss it. Here's what we're going to do together. First, I'm going to tell you a real story. The story of a man and a woman I counseled for over 3 years. A couple that was days away from signing divorce papers. They thought their marriage was finished. They thought the love was gone. And then something shifted. Something profound. And I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened in that counseling room because their story is also your story. Then I'm going to take you to the Bible. Not to preach at you. Not to quote scripture at you like some holy man standing on a corner yelling at traffic. But to show you what God actually revealed to me about marriage after 30 years of being a counselor. About what old-fashioned marriage really means. About why the modern world has gotten it so completely wrong. And what happens when you finally understand the real design. Finally, I'm going to give you 3 concrete, actionable steps that you can apply to your marriage starting today. Not tomorrow. Today. Steps that I've seen transform couples from the edge of destruction into something real again. Something true. But here's what happens if you don't listen. If you don't take this seriously. If you keep waiting for your marriage to fix itself while you both sit in that bed in silence. The resentment doesn't just stay the same, it compounds. It grows. It metastasizes. And one day, could be 6 months from now, could be 2 years, one of you is going to walk out that door, and the other one is going to be standing there realizing that they should have done something when they still had the chance, when it was still possible. And that's a regret that doesn't heal. That's a wound that doesn't close. So let me take you back. Not to your wedding day. Further back than that. I want to tell you about Robert and Catherine. Not their real names, but the details are real. Every single one. I counseled them together in my office for 3 years, and I watched their marriage go from what looked like a funeral to something that actually resembled life again. Robert was a man in his early 50s when he first came to see me. He walked into my office, I still remember this clearly, and he sat down in that chair right across from my desk, and he didn't make eye contact. He just stared at his hands. His wedding ring was there. Gold, worn down from 50 years of use, but he was looking at it like he'd never seen it before, like it belonged to a stranger. Catherine came to the next session alone. She was smaller than I expected. Sometimes when you hear a woman describe years of loneliness inside a marriage, you imagine her as someone hard, someone angry, someone built like a wall. But Catherine was soft. She wore her gray hair short. She had these sad, intelligent eyes, the kind of eyes that have looked at someone they love and realized that person can't see them anymore. The story of how they got to my office is the story of how most marriages end up in a counselor's office. But I need you to understand the beginning first, because the ending doesn't make sense without understanding what they built. Robert and Catherine had been married 37 years. They met in college. This was the 70s. Different time. He was studying business. She was studying literature. They met at a campus coffee shop. He spilled coffee on her notebook. That's the kind of small, impossible moment that changes everything. She laughed instead of being angry. He asked her out on the spot. They started dating. Then they got serious. Then they got married. For the first 10 years, it was what you might expect. They bought a house. He worked his way up in his company. She stopped working to raise their 3 kids. They went to church on Sundays. They had dinner together most nights. They held hands in the car. They had sex. Not constantly. Life got busy. Kids needed attention. Work was demanding. But regularly. Naturally. It was part of who they were together. But here's the thing about marriage that nobody tells you. It's not a constant. It's not something that just stays the same if you don't pay attention to it. It's a living thing. It needs nutrients, it needs oxygen, it needs time and attention and intention, or it starts to die. Not all at once. Slowly. So slowly that you don't notice it happening until one day you look at the person across from you at breakfast and realize you don't actually know what they're thinking anymore. That's when Catherine noticed it. It was a Sunday morning, 32 years into their marriage. She was making breakfast, just eggs and toast. Robert was reading the newspaper. The kids were grown. The house was quiet, and she set a plate of eggs down in front of him, and he said, "Thank you," without looking up from the paper. And in that moment, something shifted in Catherine. She realized that they hadn't had a real conversation in 3 days. That when Robert came home from work, he went to his office and closed the door. That when Catherine tried to talk to him about something that was bothering her, he gave short answers and turned on the television. That somewhere in all the daily routines, all the bills and the groceries and the fixing of broken things around the house, they had stopped being a couple. They were just two people living in the same house, passing each other, like ghosts. The actual breaking point came 3 years after Catherine first noticed the distance. A completely ordinary Tuesday. Robert came home from work. Catherine asked him how his day was. He said, "Fine." She asked him about a work project she remembered him worrying about. He said, "It's handled." She asked him if he wanted to go out that weekend, just the two of them, to that restaurant they used to love. And he said, "I'm tired, Catherine. I don't really feel like it." And that was it. That was the moment something inside Catherine simply fractured. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just went upstairs to their bedroom and locked the door. And she sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and she understood with absolute clarity that her husband did not want to be with her anymore. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that would require him to have the courage to admit it. But in the way that mattered. He had checked out. He had left without leaving. And she had been so focused on making sure the house ran smoothly, on being the good wife, on not complaining, that she hadn't noticed it happening until it was complete. For the next 2 weeks, Robert and Catherine barely spoke. Not in an angry way, in a numb way. Catherine would ask Robert a question and get a one-word answer. She would try to reach out physically and he would find a reason to get out of bed. She would cook his favorite meals and he would eat them while looking at his phone. And with each small rejection, Catherine felt a little piece of herself die. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small deaths. The death of hope, the death of trying, the death of believing that this man still wanted her. Meanwhile, Robert felt something different. He felt angry, not at Catherine specifically, but angry at the situation. Angry that she expected him to be excited about dinner when he was tired from work. Angry that she seemed to need things from him that he just didn't have to give anymore. Angry that after all these years, marriage still felt like a job, like an obligation, like something he had to get right or face the consequences. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. In that anger, Robert found relief. Because anger is easier than admitting the truth. The truth was that Robert had stopped doing the work of marriage. He had stopped pursuing Catherine. He had stopped being vulnerable with her. He had stopped letting her see the real, messy, complicated man underneath the successful businessman. And it was easier to be angry at her for wanting those things than to admit that he had become too tired, too comfortable, too defended to give them. Catherine, meanwhile, was sinking. She started having trouble sleeping. Not just bad sleep. She would lie awake for hours, her mind cycling through the same thoughts over and over. If I gained weight, would he care? If I left, would he even notice? If I died tomorrow, what would change? These weren't dramatic suicidal thoughts. They were the quiet, persistent thoughts of a person who had become invisible in her own life. She gained 15 pounds that first year because she started eating at night when Robert was asleep. Comfort food. Mindless eating. She started drinking wine alone in the afternoon. Just one glass. Just to take the edge off. She stopped wearing makeup. She stopped getting her hair done. Because what was the point? Robert didn't see her anyway. Nobody saw her. She went to her doctor and complained of exhaustion. The doctor ran tests. Everything came back normal. "You might be depressed," the doctor said. And Catherine wanted to scream, "Of course I'm depressed. My husband doesn't love me anymore." But instead, she just nodded and accepted a prescription for medication that didn't help because the problem wasn't chemical. The problem was that she was dying a slow death inside a marriage that looked fine from the outside. One night, Catherine found herself Googling divorce lawyers at 2 a.m. She looked at their websites. She read the fees. She imagined life in an apartment alone. She imagined telling her grandchildren that Grandpa and Grandma didn't love each other anymore. And she felt a strange kind of relief at the thought. Relief that she might finally get to stop trying. Stop hoping. Stop putting on a smile and pretending everything was okay when everything was fundamentally broken. It was Robert's mother who finally intervened. She noticed that Catherine had stopped calling. She noticed that when they visited, Catherine seemed smaller somehow, diminished. And she called Robert and said, "I don't know what's happening between you and Catherine, but I know that something is wrong, and you need to fix it before it's too late." Robert's response was that it wasn't that bad, that Catherine was being dramatic, that all marriages had rough patches, that he didn't understand why she couldn't just be content. And that's when his mother said something that stopped him cold. She said, "Robert, your father stopped talking to me when you were 15. He stopped coming home for dinner. He stopped looking at me. And I spent the next 35 years of my life in a marriage with a ghost. Don't do that to Catherine. Don't waste both your lives." 2 weeks later, Robert called my office and made an appointment. Right now, some of you are sitting with that exact same feeling. That moment when you realize the person next to you has already left. And you're wondering if it's too late. You're wondering if you're the problem. Or if they are. And you're wondering whether trying to fix it is even worth it anymore. If you're in that place right now, comment below with just the word "fighting." I want to know that you're out there, that you're not letting this go without a battle, because that's what I'm going to show you next. I want to take you back to the story of a man named Job. Now, most people know the story of Job in a very surface way. They think it's about a man who suffered and stayed faithful. But that's not the real story. The real story is about a man whose entire world collapsed. And, more importantly, it's about what that collapse did to his marriage. Job was a wealthy man. Incredibly wealthy. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had thousands of animals. He had servants and land and respect in his community. He was the kind of man who woke up in the morning knowing exactly who he was. Knowing that he had accomplished things. Knowing that his life meant something. He was a man of status, of purpose, of identity. Every morning, Job would wake and offer sacrifices for his children. He would walk through his property and oversee his business. He would sit at the city gate where important matters were discussed, and men would stand when he entered because they respected him. His wife saw him as the provider, the protector, the man who had built something. And Job saw himself the same way. His entire identity, who he was as a person, as a husband, as a father, was built on this foundation of success and control. This is important because it's who you need to understand before everything falls apart. Job was married. The Bible doesn't tell us much about her, just her name, and later, her response to catastrophe. But you have to understand that she married a man of consequence, a man with a plan, a man with answers. That's what she built her life around. And that's what made what came next so completely devastating. In a single day, Job lost everything. His servants were killed. His animals were stolen or destroyed. His house collapsed with his children inside it. All 10 of them. Gone. In a matter of hours, Job went from being a man of profound status and purpose to being a man with nothing. But here's what the Bible tells us. When Job heard the news, he did something extraordinary. He didn't fall apart. He tore his clothes. He shaved his head. He went outside and fell to the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Spiritual, faithful, inspirational. That's how we usually read that part. But then Job got sick. The Bible says he was covered in boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Can you imagine that? Every part of your body, inflamed, infected, painful. He couldn't sleep because of the pain. He couldn't eat because it hurt to swallow. He sat in ashes and scraped himself with pottery shards just to try to get some relief. And then his wife spoke to him. This is the moment that matters most. She said, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Now, we usually read that as his wife being unsupportive, being faithless, being weak. But I want to suggest something different. I want to suggest that what Job's wife was experiencing was complete psychological devastation. She had lost her 10 children. She had watched her house collapse. She was watching her husband, the man who was supposed to have all the answers, who was supposed to be strong and capable, sitting in ashes, covered in sores, unable to help her, unable to comfort her, unable to do anything but maintain his faith while she was drowning. And the weight of that was too much. She couldn't carry it anymore. She looked at her husband and saw a man who had nothing left. No health, no wealth, no children, no status, nothing. Just faith. And she couldn't understand how that was supposed to be enough, how they were supposed to survive on faith alone. This is the psychological breaking point of marriage in crisis, when one person can no longer believe in the other, when the foundation you built your life on crumbles, and you realize that the person who was supposed to be your anchor is drowning too, and they're looking at you with faith, and you're looking at them with despair, and you're both realizing that the marriage you had, the marriage that was built on what you could provide for each other, on what you could accomplish together, on what you had, is completely gone. Job's friends came to comfort him. They sat with him in silence for 7 days. That's the right response to catastrophe. Just be present. Don't try to fix it. Just sit with the pain. But then they started talking. And they started explaining why this was happening. Karma. God's punishment. Something Job did to deserve this. And Job's suffering became compounded by shame, by the suggestion that this was somehow his fault. And Job responded to his friends with words that pierce through the centuries. He said, "I cry out to you, but you do not answer. I stand up, and you merely look at me. You have turned cruel to me." This is the isolation of suffering. This is what happens when the people around you can't just sit with your pain, when they need to explain it, when they need to make it make sense, because chaos is frightening. And if they can convince themselves that you did something to deserve this, then it can't happen to them. Job spent days in this state, unable to sleep, unable to eat, covered in physical pain, watching his wife pull away from him, listening to his friends blame him for his own suffering, and the entire time, he's still trying to hold on to his faith, still trying to believe that this makes sense, still trying to be strong. This is the psychological mechanism of suffering, and this is where so many marriages break, because marriage is built on the idea that you two can face life together, that you two are stronger than the outside world, that you two have something that can withstand pressure. But when real pressure comes, not the small stuff, but the massive, life-altering, identity-destroying pressure, a lot of couples discover that they were built on sand. here's what's crucial to understanding Job's transformation. It wasn't that things got better. His children didn't come back. His health didn't immediately improve. His wealth wasn't instantly restored. The circumstances of his life didn't change. What changed was his understanding of what marriage actually meant, what purpose actually meant, what faith actually meant. In the middle of all his suffering, Job had a confrontation with God. God didn't answer Job's questions. God didn't explain why all of this happened. Instead, God asked Job questions, profound questions that forced Job to see the world differently. God asked Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Have you ever commanded the morning or caused the dawn to know its place? Do you hunt prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lion?" And in those questions, Job understood something. He understood that he was not in control. He understood that the universe did not revolve around him. He understood that his value as a person, as a husband, as a man, was not dependent on what he could accomplish or provide or control. Job had built his entire identity on his ability to manage his life, to be successful, to be the provider and protector. And when that was taken away, he believed he was nothing. But in that confrontation with God, Job realized something revolutionary. His worth was not conditional. It was not based on his accomplishments. It was not based on what he could give to his wife or his children. It was intrinsic. He was worthy simply because he existed. And more than that, he realized that marriage wasn't about two people pooling their resources and their strengths to create something. Marriage was about two broken people choosing to love each other in the midst of their brokenness. Not because they could fix each other, not because they could save each other, but because they had decided that their commitment to each other was worth more than their circumstances. Job's wife didn't come to this realization on her own. She came to it through watching her husband come to it. She saw him sit in ashes and maintain his dignity, not because he had anything left to be dignified about, but because he understood that his dignity was not dependent on his circumstances. And in that, she saw what real strength looked like. This is the epiphany that saves marriages. When you stop trying to be strong for your partner, when you stop trying to provide enough to keep them happy, when you stop trying to be perfect enough that they can't leave, when you realize that all of that is exhausting and pointless, and instead, you just show up as you are, broken, uncertain, afraid, and you say, "I can't fix this. I can't guarantee this will work, but I'm choosing to stay. I'm choosing to see you. I'm choosing to build something with you, not based on what we have, but based on who we're trying to become." That's when everything shifts. Now, let me tell you what happened when Robert came into my office for the first time, and let me tell you what I've learned in 30 years of counseling that actually works. Robert walked in, and I asked him a simple question. I said, "Robert, who are you?" He didn't understand the question. He started listing his accomplishments. He was vice president of his company. He had built his career. He had provided for his family. He had done all the right things. And I stopped him. I said, "No, I'm not asking who you've accomplished. I'm asking who you are. What do you feel? What do you fear? What do you want? Who is Robert when nobody's watching?" And Robert couldn't answer. He had spent so many years performing the role of a successful man that he had forgotten who he actually was underneath that performance. He didn't know if he even liked his job. He didn't know if he still wanted to be married. He didn't know what he wanted for breakfast, let alone what he wanted out of his life. This is the biggest problem in modern marriage. We perform for each other. The man performs the role of provider and protector. The woman performs the role of support and appreciation. And we do it so perfectly that eventually we forget it's a performance. We think that's who we are. And when one of you stops performing, the other person feels abandoned because the role you were in love with is no longer being filled. But here's what your brain is going to do when you try to stop performing. It's going to panic. It's going to say, "If I'm not succeeding at work, who am I? If I'm not strong for my family, What good am I? If I'm not holding this together, will everybody fall apart? Your brain wants to perform because performance feels safe. Performance is familiar. Performance is controllable. What you have to do, and this is hard, is sit with the terror of that. You have to actually look at the person you married and say, I don't have all the answers. I'm scared. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I need help. I need you. And most people will not do this because it feels like weakness. It feels like failure. It feels like admitting that everything you've built is fraudulent. But it's actually the only honest foundation for a marriage. Robert did this. It took him 6 months of counseling before he could sit across from Catherine and admit that he had been using work as an escape. That he came home exhausted not because work was exhausting, but because he was exhausted from maintaining the image of being fine. That he didn't know how to connect with her anymore because he didn't know how to connect with himself. That he was afraid she would leave him if she knew how lost he actually was. And Catherine, when she heard that, didn't reject him. She reached across the table and held his hand. And for the first time in 7 years, they were actually in the same room together. Here's what you do. Find one small moment this week. Could be 5 minutes. Could be in the car. Could be before bed. And you tell your spouse one real thing about yourself. One thing you're afraid of. One thing you want but haven't admitted. One thing you don't have all the answers about. No judgment, no fixing. Just truth. Your brain will resist. It will say, this is dangerous. This will blow everything up. But it won't. What will blow everything up is another year of silence. After Robert and Catherine worked on being real with each other, we moved to the second step. Intimacy. And I need to be clear about what I mean by that because most people think intimacy means sex. It doesn't. Intimacy means being known, being seen, having someone else understand the interior landscape of who you are. Catherine had stopped being intimate with Robert because she didn't feel safe. She had reached out emotionally and been rejected so many times that she had completely shut down. She didn't feel desired. She didn't feel wanted. She felt like an inconvenience. And so she withdrew. She protected herself. She built walls. And Robert, in response, took her withdrawal as confirmation that she didn't love him, that she had given up, that she was angry. He didn't understand that she was terrified. What I told them to do was this. Twice a week, for 20 minutes, they had to sit together without the television, without phones, without agenda, and they had to look at each other. Not awkwardly, not like they were performing for me, but actually look, see each other. This sounds simple. It sounds almost stupid, but it's revolutionary for most couples because it forces you to be present in a way you haven't been in years. You can't hide. You can't pretend. You can't perform. You have to just be. And your brain is going to want to run from that. It's going to suggest that this is weird. It's going to try to fill the silence. It's going to tell you that nothing's happening, so why are you wasting time? But something is happening. Something subtle. You're remembering what this person looks like. You're noticing things about them you haven't noticed in years. The way their eyes crinkle when they're thinking. The way they breathe. The specific color of their eyes. The fact that they're a whole, complete person with an interior world as complex as yours. And you're in there, in their presence, without needing to perform or fix or achieve anything. After about 6 weeks, Robert and Catherine reported something interesting. They started touching each other again. Not sexually, just small touches. A hand on the back. A brush of the knee. Not strategic touches designed to lead somewhere. Just touches that said, I see you, I'm here. And then, naturally, sex came back. Not as a performance or an obligation or a way to prove something, but as an expression of the intimacy they were rebuilding. And it was different. It was slower. It was more real. It was less about proving anything and more about connecting. Here's what you do. Schedule this time. Put it on the calendar if you have to. 20 minutes, twice a week. Phones off, television off. Just sit together. Look at each other. Let silence do its work. Your brain will fight you. It will say this is stupid. It will say nothing's happening. It will try to distract you with to-do lists and worries. Stay anyway. This is the deepest work. This is where Robert and Catherine actually transformed their marriage from something that was ending to something that was beginning again. The narrative of your marriage is the story you tell about your relationship. And most people have built a narrative that's become toxic. They're telling themselves a story about how they married the wrong person, how their partner doesn't understand them, how they've sacrificed too much, how they're not getting what they need. Robert was telling himself a narrative that Catherine had become boring, that she demanded too much from him, that he had done his part by providing, and she should be grateful, that his happiness was more important than their marriage because his happiness was what made him able to provide. Catherine was telling herself a narrative that Robert never loved her, that she had wasted her life on someone who didn't care about her, that she would never be enough for him, that she should have left years ago. And both narratives had just enough truth in them to feel real. There were moments when Catherine had been demanding. There were times when Robert had prioritized his work. There were seasons where they both had felt unseen. But they had built an entire mythology out of isolated moments, and they were living inside that mythology like it was the complete truth. What we did was we rewrote the narrative, not by denying the hard parts, but by including the full story. The story of how they met, the story of the hard times they had gotten through together, the story of times one of them had shown up for the other, the story of small kindnesses, the story of the children they had raised, the story of the house they had built, the story of choices they had made day after day, year after year, to stay. And in that fuller story, the narrative changed. It wasn't, I married the wrong person. It was, we married the right person at the wrong time in our lives, and we're finally learning how to be married. It wasn't, I've sacrificed everything. It was, I've invested everything, and I'm finally seeing what that investment can become. This step requires you to do something that's almost impossible. It requires you to look at your spouse with compassion, to understand that they're not trying to hurt you, that they're scared, that they're doing the best they can with what they know, that they're also broken, that they're also struggling, and that somewhere underneath all the performance and the resentment and the distance, there was a moment when they chose you, and they're still here. Here's what you do. Sit down with your spouse, not in conflict, in quietness, and tell them the real story of your marriage, not the edited version you've been telling yourself, the real one. Talk about the moment you fell in love. Talk about why you thought you could build something together. Talk about the hard times you've survived. Talk about moments you remember them being kind. Talk about moments they were there for you. And then ask them to tell you their story, the real one. How they saw those moments, what they were thinking, what scared them, what they hoped for. Don't argue about whose version is correct. There is no correct version. There's just their experience and yours. And both are true, and both matter. When Robert and Catherine did this, something unexpected happened. Robert started crying. Not the kind of crying where you're overwhelmed, but the kind of crying where you're releasing something you've been holding for a very long time. He was holding the realization that Catherine had loved him, that she had been faithful to him, that she had believed in him even when he had stopped believing in himself. And he had missed it. He had been so focused on performing and succeeding that he had missed the fact that he was already loved. And Catherine held him. And she told him that she had never stopped loving him, that she had been angry at the distance, but the love was always there. And then they both understood something. They understood that the marriage hadn't actually broken. It had just bent. And now it was time to straighten it. I want to come back to that moment I described at the beginning. 2 in the morning. You're awake. Your spouse is asleep next to you. Your chest is tight. You're wondering if this is fixable, if love can come back after it's gone, if two people can actually rebuild something that's been lost. And I want to tell you what I've learned in 30 years of counseling. Love doesn't go away. It gets buried. It gets covered up by resentment and fear and the daily grind of just surviving. But it doesn't actually go away. It's still there. It's still possible. Robert and Catherine came back to see me 6 months after they started rebuilding their marriage. They looked different. Lighter, somehow. Catherine's smile reached her eyes again. Robert looked at his wife like she was a person he wanted to know. Not like an obligation. Not like a role. Like a person. Catherine told me that she had started painting again. Something she loved before she got married and forgot about. Robert told me that he had cut back on work and started taking walks every morning. He and Catherine would sometimes take the walks together. They would talk. Not deep conversations. Just the small, ordinary talk of two people building a life together. And they both said the same thing. They said, "We thought it was over. We thought the marriage was dead. But it turns out the marriage was just asleep. And all we had to do was wake it up." I want you to hear me on this. Old-fashioned marriage, real marriage, is not about finding the perfect person. It's not about constant romance. It's not about never fighting or disagreeing or struggling. It's about two imperfect people deciding that their commitment to each other is more important than their comfort. It's about choosing, every single day, to show up, to be real, to be present, to believe that something is possible even when it feels impossible. The world is going to tell you that if your marriage doesn't feel good right now, you should leave. That life's too short to be unhappy. That there's someone else out there who would make you happier. And maybe that's true for some marriages. Some marriages are genuinely toxic. Some marriages need to end. But most marriages that end don't end because they have to. They end because people stop trying. They end because the hard work of real connection feels too difficult compared to the fantasy of starting over. What I'm telling you is that the fantasy is a lie. Starting over doesn't fix anything. The patterns you bring to your first marriage, you'll bring to your second. The ways you avoid intimacy, you'll use again. The fears you won't face, you'll face with the next person. The only way out is through. So here's my challenge to you. If you're in that bed at 2 in the morning, if you're wondering whether it's too late, if you're thinking about giving up, don't. Not yet. Try these 3 things. Try being real. Try being present. Try telling the true story of your marriage instead of the mythology you've been living in. Give it 90 days. That's all I'm asking. 90 days of actually trying. And if after 90 days, you can honestly say that nothing has shifted, that your spouse refuses to engage, that the marriage is truly over, then you'll know. But you have to actually try first. You have to actually risk something. You have to actually open yourself up and see if there's anything left to build on. Because I'm going to tell you something that I've seen in 30 years of counseling. The marriages that end are the ones where people give up quietly, where they stop fighting, where they accept the lie that it's too late. But the marriages that transform are the ones where someone has the courage to say, "This matters. I matter. Thank you for being here." Subscribe for more stories about the real work of being human. Because that's what we do here. We don't give you easy answers. We give you truth. And truth is the only thing that actually builds something that lasts. I'm John Silver, and I'll talk to you next week.